In the empty Senate chambers, the echo of a green blade crashing against a red one thunderously resounded, and the Avatar of the Light had come to challenge the Avatar of the Dark. It was a battle of Sith and Jedi ideologies, with the very soul of the Republic on the line. The battle is a brief one, but in it there is a furious display of lightsaber expertise and force mastery from two of the strongest beings in the entire galaxy. Yet, even after putting up a valiant effort, it is Master Yoda who ultimately retreats. He ends this terrible encounter by telling Bail Organa, "Into exile I must go, failed I have." But while Yoda may have not succeeded in ending the Emperor's life that day, or stopping the reign of the Sith, did Yoda actually lose this duel? It's often assumed that he did, simply because he chose to flee instead of continuing the fight. But the reality of the climactic battle of the Masters is much more complicated than many realize. In today's Holocron, we've decided to analyze their fight from start to finish, using several different sources from the lore, the film itself, the novelization, but most importantly, the actual screenplay written by George Lucas, all in an effort to figure out whether or not Yoda actually lost this duel against Darth Sidious. Welcome back to the archives, my friends, and let's begin. We'll skip the exchange of words and begin right when the battle does. Sidious throwing Yoda against the wall with a burst of Sith lightning. The film truly doesn't do justice to just how fast this lightning actually travels and how fast it's conjured though. Sidious had honed this ability to such a degree that it was actually easier for him to summon lightning than it was for him to use telekinesis. Although he raises his arm slowly here, telegraphing what he is about to do, we believe that he didn't actually summon the lightning itself until the very last minute. Force sensitives can sense whenever another is gathering power within themselves, and had Yoda sensed he was gathering the Force and raising his arms, he would have been able to defend himself quickly. But it is our theory that Sidious actually waited to do this until his hands were elevated, and then he let his lightning just explode from him all at once, moving with such swiftness that it actually caught the Grand Master off guard. This shows us the vast difference between Sidious's lightning and that of Dooku's. Even Obi-Wan was able to catch and block Dooku's lightning with one hand with his lightsaber. And for Yoda, it was no issue to use two to menace. But here, the Grand Master had not anticipated the extent of Sidious's power or his mastery. But it seems that the Emperor had also underestimated his opponent in turn, because he began cackling and monologuing, allowing Yoda to get up and demonstrate a forced push with such precision that only a Jedi of 8 centuries could have pulled it off. This too caught the Dark Lord by surprise, sending him flying across the room and dumping him unceremoniously to his desk. This was the moment Sidious realized that Yoda was not the decrepit fool as he had once thought, and he became very concerned. If we actually consider the implications here, we realize that Yoda has been the very first person that has touched Sidious with the Force since his own master Plagueis has. While in his guise of Palpatine, there have been very few times when he allowed others to use the Force on him, such as when Shaak Ti pulled him over to save his life during the Battle of Coruscant. But as Sidious, no one ever touched him. No one, and no one could. Not since the days when his own master was alive. And you can see a look of disbelief and even fear creep on the Dark Lord's face as he rises from his desk, realizing that Yoda's power may even rival his own. A duel is inevitable, and Sidious attempts to flee down a tight corridor, aware of Yoda's preferred form of Ataru Form 4. It's not in his favor to take the fight in a wide open area where Yoda has plenty of room to move around. He needs to close the Grand Master into a tight space to limit all of his movements. Unfortunately though, Yoda had predicted this and intercepted the retreat. The Jedi Master then pokes at Sidious's ego to force him into a direct confrontation. If so powerful you are, why leave? With both lightsabers now ignited, the duel begins. But this one is noticeably different than Yoda's confrontation with Dooku. Rather than immediately launch into a pinwheel of spins and flurry attacks, there are some pauses between the two of them as they attempt to gain leverage over the other. Yoda first jumps over Sidious, and then launches an attack backwards along the same vector. Sidious parries them both, and pushes Yoda back to the ground. And then they lock sabers for the first time. In this moment, Yoda truly feels a strength unlike anything he's faced before. The power of Darth Sidious is almost too much. In the magazine Star Wars Insider 86 titled Yoda's Right Arm, we actually get an exclusive breakdown of this very moment from Yoda's animator. Jamie Wellis says this: Yoda faces the dark side's fury, channeled by the most powerful Sith Lord in history. Rob Coleman wanted Yoda to feel the power of his enemy here, like a force that he has never dealt with before. And Wellis's team worked out 3 key poses to tell the story. Yoda and Darth Sidious lock sabers. Yoda is forced back by Sidious's power and grimaces in pain, and Yoda uses all of his strength to push Sidious back. The position of Yoda's body within the boundaries of the movie frame proved to be key. Negative space, or the unused area surrounding Yoda, became an important part of the composition and helped tell the greater story. Notice how Yoda is pushed down and back into the left corner when he's feeling the weight and power of Sidious's lightsaber. We then see he has to fully extend to the upper right corner of the frame to show that he's managed to push Sidious away. But the part we really want to pay attention to is when Rob Coleman said that he wanted Yoda to feel the true power of his enemy, like a force that he has never dealt with before. They even mentioned that when experiencing Sidious's power, Yoda grimaces in pain. Despite all of his years of training and experience, the Grandmaster has never faced someone of this caliber before. It's so difficult on his body that he's not able to perform his classic Ataru sequences. He pressed against the ground and is having to tap into every bit of his strength to push Palpatine's lightsaber away. This is the same kind of strength that he used to make two separatist dropships crash into one another during the Battle of Coruscant. And of course, Sidious cackles as he finally gets to show Yoda everything that he's been hiding. But having said all of that though, Yoda does eventually get his foothold as he starts to execute his Ataru assaults. The novel tells us that Palpatine, with escape down the corridor no longer an option, he uses the Force to activate the speaker's podium, causing it to rise into the Senate chamber. He's forced into a close quarters confrontation with the Grand Master, but he's trying to buy time until he can gain distance. But despite the leverage that he has over Yoda, he now finds himself in a duel far more difficult than before. All those years of experience in one saber discipline is proving itself to be too much for the Emperor. Yoda flips, he whirls around him, making it difficult for Sidious to pin him down. Not only this, but Yoda learned from his past saber clash. Rather than using his own physical strength against Sidious, Yoda uses kinetic momentum as he gains his acrobatics to parry the Dark Lord's blade. Sidious is no longer laughing, he's now snarling, gnashing his teeth in fury. A grim realization sets over him. Yoda is more powerful than he anticipated. In the film, this is where the scene cuts back to the duel on Mustafar, depriving us of a crucial moment that only exists in the screenplay version. The moment we miss out on is when Yoda actually disarms Sidious. For the longest time, we believed it was implied that Palpatine put his lightsaber away. He clearly wasn't winning the duel blade to blade, so he would want to fall back on his Force abilities, the realm in which he was superior to Yoda. But that is incorrect. This is what the script from George Lucas and what it says. Yoda unleashes a ferocious assault on Palpatine, causing him to almost go over the edge. The Dark Lord drops his lightsaber but recovers with a blast of energy from his hands that surrounds Yoda. Yoda is deflecting the Sith Lord's lightning bolts. The energy bolts begin to arc back on the Emperor. It looks as if the Dark Lord is doomed. Officially, Yoda wins the lightsaber duel. Sidious almost falls back off of the podium, which makes him lose his weapon. This is an extremely important detail, as it proves that Yoda is the superior duelist in this moment. The margin is not by much, but it is enough. Even Sidious understands this, as he tries to put Yoda at the disadvantage again, starting out, when he attempted to do everything he could to get away from him, when he tried to run. After this is where Sidious managed to leap up into the Senate pods and begins hurling them at Yoda. The Grandmaster leaps and dodges, attempting to close the distance where Sidious is weaker. But Sidious is tearing apart the Senate pods, laughing with glee. Throwing these immensely heavy objects around with ease is like playtime. He could control several at once, including even manipulating the one he's standing on. He's literally tearing apart democracy as he destroys the chambers of the Senate. And in the novelization, Yoda begins to have a horrifying realization. This is what the passage reads, as we've shortened it for brevity and clarity. There came a turning point in the clash of the light against the dark. It came when Yoda found himself alone against the dark, in that lightning-speared tornado of feet and fists and blade and bashing machines. His vision finally pierced the darkness that had clouded the Force. Finally, Yoda saw the truth. This truth, that he, the Avatar of the Light, the Supreme Master of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, most devastatingly powerful foe the darkness had ever known, just didn't have it. He'd never had it. He had lost before he had started. He had lost before he was born. The Sith had changed. The Sith had grown. They had adapted, had invested 1,000 years intensive study into every aspect, not only of the Force, but of Jedi lore itself, in preparation for this exact day. The Sith had remade themselves. They had become new, while the Jedi had spent that same millennium training to refight the last war. The Sith could not be destroyed with a lightsaber now. They could not be burned away with any torch of the Force. The brighter his light, the darker their shadow. How could one win a war against the dark, when the war itself had become the dark's own weapon? He knew at that instant that his insight held the hope of the galaxy. But if he fell here, then all hope would die with him. Yoda realizes that the war was rigged. Nothing he was doing would actually help the state of the galaxy. As far as the war and the soul of the Republic was concerned, the battle was over. He had lost since the moment the Rule of Two was invented. However, we're not here to talk about the ideological battle between Jedi and Sith, Yoda and Sidious. In that regard, Yoda just didn't have it. But what about the actual duel? Yoda leaps up to the Senate pod where Palpatine stands, and the Dark Lord's lightning blasts out at full power, ripping Yoda's lightsaber from his grasp. He immediately throws himself to Terminus, doing everything he can to block the bolts of fury and hatred. But Yoda is tired. In the novel, it describes it from Sidious's perspective that he knew how much it cost Yoda to bend back his lightning, and that the Master had reached the limits of his strength. The Emperor gives Yoda everything he has left, and for a brief moment, it looked as though he would prevail. Even Yoda's power were getting overwhelmed by the darkness that he now faced. But in that moment, the Jedi Grandmaster fell deeply into the Force, allowing it to rush through him for one last burst of strength. Yoda's resolve became like iron, and he looked Sidious defiantly in the eye. Palpatine realized his own lightning once again was being bent back on him. But the swelling energy in their struggle was just too much for one Senate pod, and an explosion blasts the two away from one another. Palpatine falls over the edge of his pod but manages to grasp the railing. Yoda, however, is not so lucky. Due to his small size, he gets sent much further and hits back twice against the main podium, doing a lot of damage to his small and his elderly frame. And finally, Yoda falls. Hitting against more machinery, he tumbles to the ground, barely able to stand. Star Wars Insider number 86 has an amazing detail about this fight that I never observed before. According to the animators, they gave Yoda's cloak its own character. His cloak was able to show the state of Yoda's progress in the fight. They wrote this: in addition to bringing life to the Jedi Master, animators emphasize certain points in the duel by giving his cloak a mind of its own. Subtle actions guided by the animators add to the emotional subtext of the performance in the duel. When Yoda dominates in the fight, his cloak acts in harmony with him. But when Yoda is losing, the cloak works against him, flapping around out of control. And when Yoda's cloak is finally lost, so is his hope of defeating the Emperor. When you pay attention to this detail, it becomes much easier to see at which points Yoda is actually winning and losing the duel. At the lightsaber, his cloak moves in conjunction with his body, showing that he's winning, prevailing. But when he's avoiding the Senate pods and when he's falling, it all flips around. The cloak flaps wildly, showing that he's out of his depth now. So with all of this, did Yoda lose? Well, no and yes. No, he did not lose the lightsaber duel itself. He actually won technically by disarming Sidious, proving his experience to be superior. But yes, he did lose the battle. His victory in the sword duel had drained him of his stamina, as Form 4 is prone to do, demanding everything. It requires quick bursts of energy, which Yoda facilitates by calling upon the Force to carry him beyond any natural limit. But against Sidious, it took him calling on more power than he ever had before. And by the end, when facing the Emperor, his reserves were meeting their limit. He was only able to stalemate Sidious in a contest of ability, but his small frame threw him out of the ring, and he took much more damage on the way down. And as the cloak tells us, all hope of defeating Sidious was lost. While Yoda was exhausted and beat up, Palpatine got back to his Senate pod and began searching for the Grand Master. Sidious clearly has more fight in him and is not done proving his superiority. If anything, he's taking it far more seriously now. And so, in an interesting turn of events, it was not a power difference between these two titans, but one of stamina. Yoda was not willing to fight to the death because he still had so much to live for though. A new generation hopefully to train one day. A new hope to preserve. We set out today to analyze whether or not Yoda's failure was as plain as it may seem. While at one point in his life, maybe just a few decades earlier, Yoda may have defeated Palpatine. Here, in this moment, while the Force was strong within him, he just didn't have it to go the distance. So my friends, do you find this to be a satisfying analysis? And is there anything that we happen to leave out that you want to add about this duel? Who do you believe definitively won? Is it Darth Sidious or Yoda? Or is it a stalemate? Thank you guys so much for joining us here in the archives again today, and as always, may the Force be with you.